Hey everyone, welcome to episode 361 of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist and a coach and an eating disorder expert, and I help people to fully recover. So just a note before we get started with today's show that I'm going to be opening up spots in my group program this coming Monday, so Monday the 20th of April. If you're tired of the constant food thoughts, the rules, the back and forth in your mind, the recognizing that your life isn't the way that you would like it to be and that your eating disorder is holding you back, like this is the program for you. And this is really where we focus on full recovery and everything that is required as part of that. Not just managing things a little better, but actually getting to a place where food and movement isn't the center of everything anymore, and that you can properly get on with your life and how to develop the resilience and the tools to make that a reality. So I haven't opened up spots in this program for the last 2 years, or at least not opened them up as a standalone. I've brought clients into this, but not as a standalone. And I'm going to be releasing 20 new spots. So if this is of interest to you and you want more details on this and how to take a place in this program, you can send an email to info@7-health.com and just put group in the subject line, or you can send me a message, a DM on Instagram, so @7health company, and just put group as part of that message and I can get the details over to you. So on with today's episode. So this one is one that's been a long time coming and I'm very excited about. My guest today is Emily Spence. So Emily is an animal-loving outdoor enthusiast who works as a recovery coach, drawing on both lived experience and professional training to support others in their recovery journeys. Through her coaching, content, and online platform, she supports individuals worldwide in reclaiming freedom with food, joy in movement, and peace at rest. Emily is the creator of the This Is Me Journal, a self-discovery in recovery tool, and author of Quitting Quasi Journal, which documents her journey from quasi-rut to full freedom. She is a passionate advocate for full recovery and encourages people to take bold, practical steps towards lasting freedom. So I've been aware of Emily for a really long time now. She has an incredible YouTube channel with lots of amazing videos. She has a great podcast, and she's someone that gets referenced a lot by clients. I recommend people check out her content, but often people are aware of her and bring it up to me or bring it up in the group. And I think she's just doing wonderful things in the recovery space. So as part of this conversation, we talk about Emily's eating disorder and her recovery, and really focusing very heavily on the recovery part of it and the things that she did and didn't do or worked on, or what was most useful for her, and really looking at the messiness of all of this, that it can be very easy to have this nice, clean narrative around recovery, and the reality is that that's just not the case. We also talk about extreme hunger, mental hunger, neural rewiring, rest and having a break from movement and exercise in recovery, food indecision, and lots more. So I really love this conversation. Emily is so wise, so articulate, and really just such a great proponent of full recovery. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Emily Spence. Hey Emily, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to chat with you today. It's been a long time coming.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. I feel like I've heard so much about you through my own consuming of your content and also through clients that I work with and people that I'm in contact in this space. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, for sure. And look, we've been trying to get this to work for
We
quite a
have.
while, so it's lovely that it's finally happening. And there's a lot that we can cover today. What I did in preparation for this is I went through a lot of your content. I looked at, okay, what are the things that people are most interested in? What seems to be the things that get a lot of the views and a lot of the comments, and so that's sort of how I've set this up in terms of the things I want to go through. And I know you shared some stuff that you wanted to make sure we hit. So hopefully this can be a really practical one for lots of people, in the same way that your YouTube channel is a very practical thing for people in recovery.
Yes, yeah. I'm always a very loud advocate for the importance of doing, not
Yeah.
just listening and watching, but doing. So yeah, I
Yes.
hope I hope that can be the case for this too.
Yeah. sure. We are very much on the same page with that. So yeah, let's start with you because obviously you've got into this because of your story with this, and I know if I reflect on myself in the past, I think I've spent time or too much time sometimes talking with guests where we linger on the eating disorder part and not enough on the
Mhm.
recovery part. So
Yeah.
it would be useful to talk a little about your eating disorder and what went on, but I'm much more interested in how you recovered, what were the insights from that piece. So I guess for anyone who doesn't know your story, can you give a quick snapshot of like how your eating disorder started, how long it went on for, and just like a brief overview?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So for me, it was in my sixth form years, and I think the main catalyst at that
But hang
time
on,
was,
for people in the US who
oh,
have no idea what sixth form is, how old were you?
how old was I? Was 17, is that? Oh my goodness. Yeah, 17, 18,
Okay.
kind of the years before university.
Yep.
Um, so it was a time where there was a lot of uncertainty, and I wasn't exactly sure what my path was going to look like moving forwards. And I think
Yeah.
that felt very different to the structure of education up to that point, where you just knew what was coming next, and it was all, you had a little bit of choice at times of which thing you'd like to study or what class you'd like to take, but really it was very set out. And then suddenly, you get this kind of, well, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And as I've always been a multi-passionate person,
Yeah.
and I think it was just overwhelming, to be honest, in the extreme. And I basically, over that time, I think the stress was quite significant. And for me, when I'm very stressed, and my appetite can be affected by that. And I think when I look back, I very much see that environment. What's that phrase? I always forget the way that it's worded. Environment loads the, no, what is it? The genetics loads the gun,
Load the
environment
gun and the
pulls the trigger.
environment pulls the
That's
trigger. Yeah.
that's that's the one. Very much see at that time that the stress and the uncertainty of what was coming next meant that I wasn't eating as I should have been doing, not for
Yeah.
any reason beyond that stress. And actually, that was the kind of environmental cue that pulled that trigger, and the energy deficit began at that point. And for me, it was sort of in terms of actively engaging in my eating disorder before I decided recovery, that was a period of probably only about 9 months to a year.
Okay.
And then I committed to recovery in 2011, which feels like, no, 2012. And so, yeah, 2012. And that was the point where I sort of committed to recovery. Quite simply, I was seeing all of my peers going off and traveling and having fun summers, and I recognized that my life had become very small,
Yeah.
and I wanted things to be different. And that was the point where I committed to recovery. And then it was a lengthy period of time with some chunks of real bold commitment, and then some lapses and slip ups and setbacks. And then I fully recovered in 2020. So, yeah, that's kind of a very brief overview
Cool.
of journey into and then through and out of recovery.
Okay, cool. That's a good starting point, and I can ask some more details. So if we look at you before the eating disorder, so you as, I don't know, a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, what was your eating like at that point? What was there any quote unquote healthy eating or worries around food or any of that predated this period?
Yeah, no, I would say that there was gloriously healthy eating, not in the inverted commas version, but in the true sense of what that is. I
Yeah.
really listened to my body. I had what I wanted, when I wanted, as much as I wanted. There was a wide range of things. Yeah, just gloriously free, and
Yep.
very much, very simple, very easy. As I said, what I want, when I want, as much as I want. That was what food was to me. And the same goes with movement as well. I was always somebody, as my animals have just interrupted there, I've always loved animals. I've always loved being outside. Movement was always something which was part of my life, not necessarily in any formal way, but
Yeah.
just going out and being in the forest. And I grew up in quite a rural space. So both food and movement were really joyful, free, healthful parts
Okay.
of my life.
Nice. And what about something like anxiety? Would you say that prior to your eating disorder, after your eating disorder, are you someone that's higher than the average in terms of anxiety?
Yeah, I think I am, and have always been, more on the side of an overthinker. more
Okay.
prone to feeling very deeply about things and
Yep.
caring a lot. And I think when you are someone who tends to care a lot about things, naturally with that
Yep.
comes a tendency or a a chance of being more anxious. So I think on a spectrum of confidence to anxiousness, yes. However, I'd say that I always had a really solid ability to navigate that. And I
Okay.
think, when I reflect, I think the nourishment and that real healthfulness of my body and brain in that time was a very big part of being able to kind of live in that natural characteristic in a way
Yeah.
that didn't negatively impact myself or my life greatly at all.
Okay. No, did the like highly sensitive persons, HSPs, do you does that fit for you? Does it feel like that's your wiring?
Yeah, I think I feel everything loudly. And
Okay.
I love that because it means that I get so excited about things. I'm visibly buzzing about things if something is really joyful and exciting. But equally, on the flip side of that, that means that things can hurt a lot when they hurt. And it means that things can be really scary when they're scary. And it can mean that things can be really, difficult when they're difficult. So I think, yes, I do relate to that. And yeah, I don't think, I think of it as, in many ways, I feel like it's a superpower because actually I really love the fact that I feel loudly about
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. And look, it is a superpower. This is something I suggest to lots of clients because it is something that with clients I work with, they really do over-index in terms of highly sensitive and HSPs. And look, there are obvious downsides to that. It can be more difficult to, I don't know, be in a loud restaurant or be in certain environments or to be watching the news or those kinds of things. And there can be something really beautiful about, hey, I can just feel so deeply and watching that film or listening to that piece of music or having that experience with that friend, like, man, that just touched me so deeply. And so,
Yes.
yeah, with everything, there's pros and cons.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so you said that it was probably a 9 month period from when it started to when you started to recover. So in the whole scheme of things, not a long
No.
time compared to
Yeah.
to many people.
Yeah.
How like was it really at that 9 month point that you first noticed, okay, there's a problem, or hey, pretty early on, even within a month, 2 months, 3 months, I was already aware like this is not great.
Yeah, I think it was quite a short and sharp period of, very much actively engaging in disorder without any kind of glimpse or desire for recovery. And I think it wasn't long at all before certainly my friends and my family were aware that things were not okay.
Yeah.
And I think deep down, that was the same. I was aware of that. However, I do look back on that time and I'm very aware that I was in this sort of state of disconnect and denial
Yeah.
because of that malnourishment that was present. I feel like I often talk about the flying the I'm fine flag. And that
Yeah.
was me, It wasn't just that I was saying it and then behind the scenes I was feeling 24/7 distraught and in great
Yeah.
conflict. Actually, for a lot of the time, I did feel I resonated with that sense of this is just me and I'm fine. And it was
Yeah.
just this conveyor belt existence. And it's quite scary how swiftly that occurred and took over, and how dominant and strong that was, that I was so out of touch with the
Yeah.
reality of where actually I was not in any way, shape, or form living my best self and life at that time.
Okay. And what moment or moments started crystallize like this isn't how I want to be living, or
Yeah.
there is a real problem here, and there was more of a connection with the reality of the situation.
Yes, I think glimmers of it throughout. As I say, I don't want to paint a picture like I was 24/7. Oh, everything's absolutely wonderful because I think when you're in that place, deep down that things aren't right, but there is,
Yeah.
particularly from that biological perspective, there is such a strong kind of conveyor belt, that migratory sort of, yep, no, I'm just doing this. This is what I do. I go from A to B, B to C, and then I fall asleep and I do the whole thing again.
Yeah.
I think for me, once I'd gone through my final exams at school, and then I was sort of, it was the summer, the long summer before everyone goes off to university. I, at that point, was very aware that lots of my peers were going off on holidays. They were getting ready for university. There was so much life and excitement
Yeah.
bubbling around me. And I felt so distant from that. I felt
Okay.
like it wasn't even at the time like I wanted it, but I wanted to want it. And
Yeah.
I think that for me was a point where I really paused and went, if I like, do I want this? Do I want to keep walking this path? And I
Yeah.
think I'm always and will always be very grateful to the me who had that moment and made myself sort of pause and go, right, do I want to continue walking this way? And
Yeah.
chose to be bold and brave and do things differently.
Nice. And maybe there's also this point of contrast where I know you said there was a lot of anxiety around, hey, I'm 17 or 18 and people are asking me to figure out what I want to do for the rest of my life. And was possibly some excitement about that of like maybe I could do this thing and maybe I could do that thing.
Yeah.
And while there was indecision about it, there was still excitement of all the possibilities. And to then recognize, hey, there's a real graying of all that. And there's
Yes.
and just feeling much more muted about this. And this is not how it was a year
No.
ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often say that we often think when we talk about the why of recovery, it's very future focused. And I am all here for that. I think it's
Yeah.
very important that we hold a solid sense of why we are wanting to recover, what lies on the horizon of that
Yeah.
place of freedom. But I
Yeah.
also think, and I think especially when you're in the thick of it, sometimes the thing that propels you out isn't what lies ahead, it's the reality of what lies where you are.
Yeah.
And I know at that time I was like, I have no idea what lies ahead. I don't know why I want to go that way, but I don't want to stay here.
Yes.
And I think it's very important not to overlook the power of going, I'm unsure, I'm uncertain about what's over there, but I know what this is. And I
Yeah.
also, deep in my gut, know what this is going to continue looking like if I
Yeah.
stay here. And I don't want that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you said that because when I'm working with people, there are exercises that I do in terms of creating your vision and where you would like to be. And for some people, that really resonates. Like it is so crystal clear and there's this real pull towards this. And for other people, that is so vague and it feels
Mm.
so big. And so let's come back to, okay, looking at your day to day, how would you like things to actually be different?
Yeah.
Like that becomes a much more helpful frame.
Definitely, definitely. And, as is often the way in journeys, the tools that you use and the tools that are valuable change as you move through the process. And so
Yes.
the things and the aspects of why that help maybe at the start or at certain places may well change. And I know I certainly found that, initially it was a case of, well, I don't want to stay here. And
Yeah.
as I began to make progress, the clarity of the horizon became more and more poignant to me as like, no, I want that. I want to get to this place. And so I think, yeah, the tools, it's good to have a variety of tools in your toolkit.
Yes, definitely. And so then with you and getting started with recovery, let's start at the very beginning. What
Yeah.
what did I don't know, the first week or the first month or those very early stages look like in terms of what were you doing differently? Where did you start with this? And we'll get on to what you would do differently if you could do your time over again, but just in terms
Yeah.
of what it did actually look like.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I in the UK with the NHS, I was having sort of sporadic input from teams. The waiting lists are very long and actually much worse now than they were a decade ago.
Yeah.
But I personally wasn't finding the support I was accessing there particularly helpful. And around, as I say, around that time where I was looking at all my peers going off and doing these things, I basically, myself and my mum, I sat down and I was like, right, I want things to be different and I don't feel like this is helping. What can
Yeah.
we do? And quite simply, I made a decision to go, right, what would some meals and some snacks that are challenging look like? And I committed to making those happen, basically. And my experience was that, and I often talk about the kind of hop, skip, and a jump for this reason, that actually by doing that and by putting in place and changing up breakfast, lunches, dinners, like changing things up to make them more challenging.
Yeah.
After a couple of weeks of that,
Yeah.
my hunger kicked in a very big way. And actually, at the time, I had no idea about extreme hunger. I did not know what this was. I wasn't really engaging in recovery community or recovery spaces online. So it was pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
But without lots of information from online, actually, I think I was able to just tap in and tune in and go, I'm just really, really hungry. And at
Yeah.
that point, then I began to be really honoring my hunger with that kind of those meals and things continuing as a backbone and building on those progressively. But ultimately, once that hunger kicked in, it wasn't really a case of, lunch, snacks, breakfast, snacks, all this thing. It was just a case of a high volume of eating from the moment I was waking up to the moment I was going to sleep, basically.
Okay, sure. And so yeah, we'll come back to that piece, but I want to go back to the
Yeah,
initial part where you said, okay, these are some snacks, these are some
yeah,
meals, and you
yeah,
started doing that.
yeah.
What advice would you have for the listeners who are at that point in terms of, and look, everyone's experience can be different with this, but how did you get over like that day one, that day three, that day five? Because there's going to be lots of thoughts, there's going to be physical
Yes.
sensations. How did you hold steady and say, you know what, this is hard, but I'm continuing to go forward with this?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I'd want to say is I did not, I'm not some unicorn. I didn't, breeze through that time. It was not smooth sailing at all. It was
Yeah,
messy. There was a lot of emotion. There was a lot of crying. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of fear, huge amounts of backlash. I think one of the key things that helped me a lot was trying as much as I could to stay in the now and trying to take things one bit at a time. So focusing
yeah,
on that meal that was in front of me. I also think something that helped, and I learnt about this, and I often now talk about this a lot because now I know a lot more about it. And as I went through my journey, but I think predicting is a very valuable tool. So
yeah,
predicting that there is going to be backlash. No, that does not make it go away. No, that does not make it easier. But if you can predict some of the moves that your opponent is going to make going
yes,
into battle, you are in a more
yeah,
powerful position to take action. And so I think staying in the now, being
yeah,
able to predict and sort of accept that it was going to be messy and it was going to be up and down was key.
yeah,
And then I think also sort of what I now call sort of setting myself up to win. At the time, it wasn't. Again, it's so easy when you have been through the journey to look back and it's so packageable. At the time, it was very
yeah,
messy. But
yeah,
realistically, I think setting myself up to win was important. And that looked like, I was lucky in that I had some really close recovery buddies in the form of my mum in particular. She was a real solid anchor point for me.
yeah,
Making sure that actually I got rid of some of the foods that were just distinctly opposed to recovery, and stocking up the house with the things that actually I was like, right, okay, I know that this is a breakfast that feels
yeah,
challenging. Right, I'm going to buy that stuff in. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm not going to plan, 12 different breakfast ideas. Actually, I'm going to have one or two things and I'm going to make that
perfect.
happen. And I'm
Yeah,
just going to get repeating that. And now I look back and with the knowledge that I've gained through my own journey and then also through the work I do with others, I can see it now and go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Setting yourself up to win, keeping it simple. These are really valuable things.
yeah, nice. Okay, I think that's really helpful advice for people, and it's the way I work with clients as well. Where hey, let's keep it simple. Let's have
Yeah.
one or two breakfast options, or one or two lunch options, or a couple of snack options,
Yeah.
so that and also decide that stuff in advance,
Yeah.
especially in the early days. We're not dealing with spontaneity. We're not dealing with those things that come later on. We're dealing with how do you get more energy and more rest,
Yeah.
etc. So if that means that you know in advance that this is what you're doing for this week, great. That actually helps you so that you're not deciding at the point where things are most challenging, which is just before a meal or a snack. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, for
Exactly.
sure. And so then when that extreme hunger hit for you, and we'll talk more generally about extreme hunger, but I just want to
Mhm.
talk first about your experience and then we can come
Mm.
back to that. But how long did it last before you gave into that versus I'm really trying to navigate my way without giving into it, or what was your experience, especially for someone who knew nothing about this as a
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah, I think actually the initial leaning into it was quite swift
Okay.
because it really felt like it hit me like a ton of bricks. And it
Yeah.
almost felt like my body was going, right, we're doing this. So get on board because we're going.
Yeah.
I think the point where maybe it became more challenging was as that was continuing to happen.
Yeah.
And then as I was doing that healing and my body was rightfully so making use of that energy that it was asking for, and there was restoration going on. I think it was as that went on
Yeah.
that it started to become a bit more challenging, that where there was a bit more backlash, where there was particularly in terms of reflecting on the contact that I was still having with the treatment team at that time, where there was some conflicting messaging around honoring that hunger and whether that was the right thing to be doing. And my gut instinct said yes, but that wasn't always the message that I was receiving. And so I actually think left to me and my body, quite naturally, I honored it. And that
Yeah.
meant lots of food. And it was then as time went on that there were other things. One, that build up of kind of anxiety and fear, and
Yeah.
that builds up of backlash.
Yeah.
And then also those external messages sowing seeds of doubt.
Yeah.
That's where I think things started to get a little bit trickier.
Okay, sure. And so did you, because of those external messages, because of that doubt that it created, was there a point where you said, okay, I'm going to step away from these services because this isn't actually helping me?
Yeah, so I think my experience actually was that my extreme levels of hunger, they blasted on for many months.
Yeah.
Um, and at a certain point, probably I can't remember the exact time frames because it was a while ago now.
Yeah.
But a good while into that, I had made such amazing progress. It must have been a good 6 months, maybe more, 6 to 9 months later. And my
Yeah.
hunger was still really quite high, but it had reduced somewhat. Sort of the ferociousness of it had reduced a
Yes.
little. And I was feeling so much more me in every single way. And it was at that point that I actually went to my kind of final meeting with the team, and I had a very unhelpful comment along the lines of, "Oh, don't you think there should be a bit more control going on here?" And it was a strange thing because that was my final point of contact with them. That was my sign off and
Yeah.
discharged and go away. And I'd barely been seeing them, to be honest, because I, again, personally didn't find it super helpful. Um, but it ended up that actually for me, and I suppose this is probably one of the points where I look back and go, gosh, I wish I could teleport back to that moment because I think if I had done things differently coming away from that, I think the
Yeah.
trajectory of my recovery journey would have looked very different. I think I realistically could have been recovered within the next 6 months after that, fully recovered. But it
Yeah.
ended up that actually, even though I came away from that with the best intentions, that led to a sort of quite significant lapse. And from that point onwards, there was quite a lot more of picking up and putting down and trying to do it and trying to honor the hunger, but then trying other things and and just a lot of here and there. And it wasn't for a number of years before I really sort of recognized actually I was living in a sort of quasi state, and I
Yeah.
committed very fully to recovering. So sorry, I've probably gone off piste a little
No.
bit there with that question, but
Well, I think
yeah,
that's just useful to recognize, and as you said, it can be very easy to tell your recovery story in this
Mm.
nice package, put a bow
Yes,
on it type thing, and you're getting into the weeds with this a little bit and saying, well,
yeah,
there was this thing that then happened, and that derailed me actually for a couple of years, where I
yeah,
then got in this sort of middle ground, no man's land of doing
yeah,
a little bit, pulling back, etc. And I think that's useful because I think what otherwise can happen is, well, Emily had an eating disorder only for about 9 months. Then she did some recovery, and then she just got there and like she had a pretty easy time of it. And
yeah,
there are some elements of your story that are easier than someone who had an eating disorder for 20 years. Like
yeah,
that has to be honored.
yes.
And we don't need to make this into this very easy thing when that's not the reality of what
Yeah.
happened for you.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've always been very keen to speak loudly about the messiness and the bumpiness of recovery because
Yes.
everyone's journey is unique. But I
Yes.
do think that it can be easy. And I remember for myself, when I did start to sort of learn about the online recovery space, and there were particular people that I was really looking up to and watching their videos and reading about. And I know for myself that I would look at these people and see them as these almost these beacons of impenetrable recovery power who just had
Yes.
this unwavering certainty of what they needed to do, and that the moment they decided that they were going to recover, that was it, and they did it. And, I know that there are probably some people that resonate with that and that's their experience, but both my own and a lot of the people, in fact, the vast majority of the people that I have crossed paths with, that just isn't the reality very often for
Yeah.
recovery. And so I've always been very keen to be loud about the fact that recovery and getting fully recovered is possible. The journey
Yeah.
there can and will look different. Each and every one of us has a unique path. But it's so important to really hold space for the fact that even these people who can sit and speak with such clarity and confidence, that actually when you are in it, it's very, very different. It's a lot easier when you're sitting looking back to go, oh, yes, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, I completely understand that. Oh, I can see how this worked. It's
Yes.
very different when you're in it.
Yes, and it's heartbreaking to hear that you had this person making a comment
Mm,
about control. And look, I will say, I imagine from their perspective, it was a very well-meaning
mm,
comment. It wasn't malicious. It was, from my perspective, down to a lack of understanding
yeah,
about how you talk about recovery, what you say to
yeah,
someone who's in recovery, and that then had a pretty profound effect on the
yes.
trajectory of what happened next.
Yeah, definitely. I really don't believe that people go into helping and healthcare related roles wishing to cause harm or with malicious intent. But I do think there are aspects of the eating disorder treatment where people are vehemently protective of a map that doesn't
Yeah.
actually lead to the place of full recovery. And rather than look and go, oh, the map is problematic, there
Yeah.
is this tendency to go, oh, but you can't get to that place. And
Yeah.
I really want there to be that shift of them going, hey, actually, the destination is very real. People can fully recover. Maybe
Yeah.
we need to shift the map that we're using somewhat.
Yes. Totally. And especially if there's the narrative of, well, you don't want to swap one eating disorder for another, and like this is looking like it's turning into binge eating disorder, or
Mhm.
well, look, you've hit this BMI amount, so now this is the time to do maintenance. All of those things that
Yes.
are embedded in that map is
Yeah.
what then keep people stuck. And
Yeah.
if
Absolutely.
you are then being told like this is as good as it's going to get, or this is the point that you start to reduce your intake, and the eating disorder is still very loud, the message that you internalize is like, okay, I can't recover. Like this
Yeah.
is as good as it's going to get. And if this is as loud as it is now, why am I going to stay in this body? I'll go back to the body I was in before, because it feels some ways very similar.
Yeah.
And this feels like the worst of those two options.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's an excruciating place. And as I
Yeah.
say, one of the reasons why I wanted to start sharing initially on Instagram and then over into sort of YouTube and things was because I really wanted to be another loud advocate of the fact that full freedom is possible and to really speak honestly about the messiness of
Yeah.
that journey and that it is okay for it to be whatever kind of messy your messy is, but that none of that takes away from the fact that full freedom is possible.
Yeah, sure. And so then what happened? You said there was this couple of years where you're ping-ponging between doing some, not doing some, etc. What then stepped it up again so that you started doing that more
Yeah,
committed full recovery type
yeah.
aspects?
So I feel that that did feel like quite a poignant moment. It was actually I finished my degree because I had a few years. It was
What, out of interest, what did you do? What did you
I
study?
studied podiatry.
Okay.
So yeah, really, and I'm now currently retraining as well in physiotherapy. So I healthcare was always the right pathway for me. I really love working with people. I love being
Yep.
able to help make a difference. But there were aspects of podiatry that just didn't fully tick all of my boxes, and I'm really pleased to be now fully recovered and exploring, building on that. And yeah, I'm excited about. Anyway, that's a whole different topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, I finished my degree and I was at a point where myself and my partner, we were looking at moving somewhere that was going to be good for both of us to be getting jobs. And it was a very, an exciting new chapter. And I think it was this really stark awakening that if
Yeah.
I didn't crack on and actually fully recover, my life was always going to be me and ED do things. It was, me and ED go on holiday, me and ED move into our first house, me and ED, get married, me and ED get a job. It was always going to be there. And I I didn't want that. Again, we come
Yeah.
back to that why, it was, yes, there were all these things, but I think at that point I was like, well, I can do all those things. I can go and get married. I can get a job. I'd reached a point where I was very much living my life, and a lot of people would have looked at me and gone, oh yeah, that's Emily. That she's fine. She's
Yeah.
recovered. But I knew deep within myself that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And it really was a point of going, I don't want to always have this thing with me through
Yeah.
all of these experiences, kind of blurring my memories, marring my memories and experiences. And I was like, right, I need to really boldly commit, because I also was like, I don't want this recovery thing to continue to be like a hobby that I'm kind of doing alongside.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want recovery to be my hobby. I want it to be something that I did and I finished, so I'm
Yeah.
recovered.
Yeah.
And so it was at that point that I ended up writing a journal throughout the whole process, and termed it, my quitting quasi journal, because I was like, right, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm getting fully free, and that was a period of just under a year. So that, yeah, as I say, in the early summer of 2020, I was fully recovered.
Okay. Nice. And so did that mean, in essence, just going back to what you were doing in the early-ish stages of your recovery before that had got interfered with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe one of the things that was a bit different there is the intensity of my hunger wasn't
Okay.
quite the same. I definitely had recovery hunger. I think often there's this kind of black and white, there's extreme hunger and then there's just eating. And actually, I think we must remember there's a very important middle space,
Yep.
which is just recovery eating, which
Yep.
is that abundant eating to restore and replenish an energy deficit. So I definitely had that, but the kind of really intense extreme hunger, that didn't show up in the same way. There were still moments of it, but not the same.
Yeah.
And I think a big focus was in weeding out all of the behaviours and the tendrils of disordered fears that were
Yeah.
still lingering, and being really proactive of going, right, here are these fears. I need to rewire this. I need to do this. And it was opposite action, opposite action, opposite action.
Okay. Nice. And we've talked a lot about the food aspect of it, but
Yeah.
in terms of the movement aspect,
Yes.
how much did that come into your eating disorder? And you said I had this lovely, healthy relationship with
Yeah.
movement. I love being outside. I love being in nature. I love being with animals. And so, what happened with your eating disorder in that? And then what happened in terms of the recovery connected to it?
Yeah, and I think actually it's for what I'm about to say is one of the reasons why for a long time it kind of went under the radar, because I whether I chose, I'm not sure what word to use there, but basically, I didn't resonate with that, person that is running miles and miles or going to the gym all of the time, or,
Yeah.
doing any kind of formal structured exercise. That wasn't a feature.
Yeah.
What was this sort of drive to be doing and moving, and a real restlessness and a real resistance to rest. And it wasn't just in the form of movement, it was just generally in terms of busyness. Was a I turned into this busy bee. Like, I often call it this conveyor belt existence. It's like my life turned into some kind of endurance event where I listed out each day what I needed to do. And it was like
Yeah.
A to B, B to C, pause for some lunch, right? And now, da, 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 da. And my days were just these kind of military endurance operations.
Yeah.
And I'd come up for air at the end of each day and maybe get an hour of just chilling, and maybe a little
Yeah.
bit more hunger would surface and watch a bit of TV, and then we'd be back around again. And so I think for a long time, but it's particularly in that first chunk of recovery and where there was this back and forth. When my extreme hunger hit, I did a brilliant job of really committing to resting.
Yep.
And that was crucial. And I
Yeah.
absolutely know for a fact that, and I'm very loud about that as well, rest is so important. But
Yeah.
in that time where I was kind of toying with things and backwards and forwards, again, that was a period where that centering of rest became inconsistent, as well as the centering of really unrestricted eating. And then when I came to the point of quitting Quasi, that was a time again where I discovered a love of a variety of different outdoor hobbies. When I was at university, I joined the climbing club and I learned to climb, and I was like, oh my goodness, I love this. This is
Yeah.
incredible. Look at these places I'm getting to go to. And I do think for me, that the outdoors and those hobbies were part of the catalyst to me going, if I don't get free, it's always going to be, and it's always going to be me and my eating disorder go on a trip to the mountains, me and my
Yeah.
eating disorder go and do this amazing climb. And like I alluded to a little moment ago, I'd got to a point in my journey at there where I was okay. And from the outside looking in, there was a lot of noise of, oh, that's just Emily. That's how she is. She is just a bit of a busy bee. She's just here, there, and everywhere. And da-da.
Mm.
But I knew in my heart that actually, whilst no, I wasn't somebody who was, at the gym multiple times a week, every day, whatever that might look like. I wasn't someone who was running lots. Like my compulsion with movement didn't look like that. I was somebody who would always walk no matter what. I was the person who would always be washing up all of the things the
Yeah.
night before if there was a party that was going on. I was the one that would say, "Oh, I'll go and pop that to the shops for you." I was
Yeah.
always just doing and busy. And I think, and I often say this, one of I feel that one of our best indicators of our relationship with movement is our relationship with rest. And at that time, my relationship with rest was very poor. It was a okay at the end of the day thing. And if you'd have pinpointed me down and said that at the time, I would probably have been quite defensive and like, no, I can rest. I'm fine. I can do rest. That's fine. I just like doing this. And but the
Yeah.
reality was rest was itchy, scratchy, and
Yeah.
it was uncomfortable, and it didn't feel like something that I wanted to do, and it wasn't prioritized. And yeah, I feel like it was a very, very important thing to me when I quit Quasi that I very boldly recentered that need for fully resting. And that was hard at the time because it meant saying no to some things that I, on a core level, had discovered a real love for. And they
Yeah.
weren't eating disorder, they were me. And
Yeah.
that almost felt harder because I was having to say no to trips and no to stuff that I was like, I really want to do this. But I look back on that time now and I'm incredibly grateful that I chose to do that because I know for a fact that that has enabled me as a recovered me to have a really healthful, joyful relationship with those things and to
Yeah.
reclaim full and complete peace at rest too.
Nice. Nice. And I think that's a really useful message for people because what I hear so often is, look, I just have this true love for this thing, or this thing was so important to me even before the eating disorder. And it's like two things can be true at the same time. It can
Yeah,
be, yes, I can acknowledge that this thing
absolutely.
isn't an eating disorder thing that has come about because of your eating disorder, and we can also acknowledge you continuing to do it is perpetuating the eating
Yeah.
disorder and is having an impact on the amount of recovery that your body is getting and is having an
Yes.
impact on the amount of rest you're getting.
Yeah.
And so to hear you be able to explain that, I think is really useful. That hey, I can love this thing and recognize it's not an eating disorder compulsion, and also recognize that it's keeping me stuck.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I think you can utilize that love to serve your recovery and
Yep.
to really fuel the fire for wanting to do that full healing work. And as I say, when I look back now, I am so grateful to the me who put those things back on a shelf and
Yeah.
said, right, they will be a part of my life. I want those to be a part of my life. I love those, but not now. And
Yeah.
actually at that time I'm also really grateful to the me who got proactive in being curious about the other things that I enjoy to do because I think ultimately
Yeah.
rest is not just for recovery, rest is a crucial thing for life,
Yeah.
particularly if you are somebody who likes any kind of active hobby or recreation. Rest is
Yeah.
absolutely crucial. And so I think there's a lot of value to gain from shelving those things that you love, both for the purpose of being able to go back to those things in a really
Yeah.
free sense, but also to broaden that kind of sense of, oh, actually, I love that. And I also like these. I really love that kind of film. I really enjoy that kind of craft. I like playing
Yes.
that game, whatever it might be. There is so much value to doing that work.
Yes, for sure. And I just did a whole podcast on rest. I'll put it in the show notes. And I think there can be this misunderstanding of what that means. And rest is not just you have to be sleeping or you have to be sitting on the couch doing nothing. It could
Yeah.
be doing a puzzle, doing a crossword. It could be playing a guitar, playing the piano. Like there are, as I go through in the podcast, like there's so many different versions of that.
Yeah.
And so often when I speak to clients, they're like, "It's so nice. Like I used to really love film, and I've got
Mhm.
back into that, and that was something that I couldn't do before. Or I used to
Yes.
always love doing puzzles, and we'd have that out on the dining room table, and I just stopped being able to do that because I couldn't stand still or I couldn't sit
Yeah.
long enough to do it.
Yes.
And so even for people who are like, oh, I was always quite a busy, active person, if they reflect, there are probably things that they did used to do
Yeah.
where there was that time of rest, whether that's reading books, whether that's whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I imagine with doing this, there would be a lot of thoughts coming up of that's too much food or that's too much rest. And so what did you do with that? Or if you didn't do that particularly well, what would you suggest for your past self now knowing what you know?
Yeah. And I think, again, this is another place where, with hindsight, it's so easy to sit and look and go, every single bit of that food and that rest was crucial to get free. And
Yeah.
it's so easy to have such solid clarity of that, and therefore to have no doubt, no uncertainty around it. The reality was, when I was in it, there was anxiety present. There was
Yeah.
uncertainty present. There was, flickers of judgment present. There was a lot of eating sort of backlash present. So again, I think the main thing, or some of the main things that helped me were, one, reaching out and actually making contact with recovery spaces where I started to learn what was shared in this
Yeah.
experience. Because no, each of our journeys is different and we don't walk the same exact path, but there is a lot about the shared recovery process and the shared
Yeah.
experience of recovery
Yeah.
that is a really valuable resource to tap into, to look ahead and to go, other people have walked this path before me. And
Yeah.
actually I can look at that and use their their experiences, their words, their reassurances as a
Yeah.
sort of beacon of, yeah, keep going. So I think that was very, very important. I also think, again, keeping it one day at a time, keeping it in the now was important.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I feel like having certain mantras that I would come back to, in terms of there is no too much,
Yeah.
more is better, unconditional permission to eat now and forever. I think
Yeah.
certainly as I was moving through recovery towards those later stages, that deep acceptance that there was no finish line to this. It wasn't like I would get to a certain point and then suddenly things would change. I didn't have unconditional permission, really, really acting in alignment with the fact that that unconditional permission to eat without restriction stands firm and true both in and beyond recovery. I feel
Yeah.
like that was, yeah, absolutely crucial in it.
Yes. And I think that is a stumbling block for a lot of people. And again, sometimes it's because of the messaging they get from different
Absolutely.
services where, okay, there's a point you can do this, and then there's a point we need to go back to what I often refer to as like eating disorder light. Like, don't
Yes.
take it quite as far, but hey, do you really need to have those foods? And maybe you don't need to have that snack anymore. It's like that's not the right messaging because
Yeah.
then it creates this struggle for people of like, okay, when will I know that I have to do that? But also,
Yeah.
what if I then use my recovery time and I don't properly get in all of those foods that I haven't had for a long time, and maybe I won't like, is that the right pizza for me to be having, and what if that's disappointing, and all of that type of
Yes.
stuff,
Yeah.
where it gives you this window, and you better get that window right, otherwise you've missed out. And
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to have that misconception. And
No.
I'm in the same way as you are, like, really, I want to get this across. Like, it is now and forever.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's remembering that that isn't just to get recovered, but it is about staying recovered as well. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, being fully free is absolutely possible. You can live with no eating disorder thoughts in your mind at all. But one of the things that you do have is that genetic predisposition. And
Yeah.
ultimately, that isn't something that goes away. So
Mm.
for myself, it's not like I walk through my recovered life constantly batting away the fear of, oh my goodness, energy deficit, it might come and get me. But ultimately, I am aware of the fact that not that I would ever want it, because ultimately
Yes.
recovery teaches you the wonders of body and the
Yeah.
wonders of that trust and the wonders of actually really listening to what your body needs. But even if I was to think, oh, I really fancy doing that thing that's a bit restrictive, I really fancy doing that thing which is in some way micromanaging my body, it is not and will never be for me. And as I say, one, I don't spend my life fighting that off, nor do I
Yes.
have any desire for it because of the work that goes on in recovery. But I
Yes.
think really knowing that ultimately these things are not just to get recovered, they
Yeah.
are to stay recovered. And when it comes to that, for example, I am somebody, I've gone back to these hobbies that I love so much, climbing and mountaineering. They're
Yeah.
just the greatest joys to me. But I mean, when I think of mountaineering, there is no doubt about it, an energy demanding thing. And
Yeah.
what staying recovered looks like to me and what being aware of that genetic predisposition looks like to me, and that is I'm the one with the snacks. I've always got lots and lots and lots of snacks. Like I am
Yeah.
going into those shops and I'm going, right, what is my most energy? Where are those peanut M&Ms? Bring those to me. I need multiple bags of those. I feel like it isn't this thing where you're constantly thinking, oh my goodness, I must avoid it, but it is something that you have a healthy respect for.
Yeah.
And I worked bloody hard to get free. And actually, I have a lot of pride and there's a lot of joy to be had in going, I know that my body is a body that needs plentiful, abundant nourishment
Yeah.
for life. And
Yeah.
actually, there is a lot of peace to be had in going, yeah, and I'm going to continue both now and always embracing that. And that looks like continuing to action that unconditional permission to eat and rest and listen to my body.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really useful reminder for people. And also the unintentional ways
Mm,
of getting into that energy debt. And so for you, and this is going to be true for other people who are listening, it's like, I need to be on the lookout if there's some grief in the family, or
yeah,
there's some grief in my life. Like, I, more than the average person, need to make sure that I still eat through that, because I don't want to have this tragedy happen and then I find myself back in this place,
yeah,
or going through pregnancy. Okay, there's a lot of morning sickness that's going on, and I need to make sure that I'm doing my utmost to be getting the energy in, because
yeah,
I could very easily get back into a place where it wasn't a choice, but well, those thoughts are getting a lot stronger
yeah,
again. And
yeah,
so being aware of these different points of life, menopause, etc., where it becomes more likely that that could be not forced upon you, but just happens to you. And hey,
yeah.
I need to be on the lookout for that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the silver linings of recovery is that it does give you such a deep sense of respect for your body. And
Yeah,
I feel, when I look at the last few years, I had a significant loss, and actually it wasn't an easy time. But one of the things that was easiest was I just made sure that I continued to get regular, abundant nourishment going in. And
yeah,
when I was moving through recovery and thinking about, you know, keeping and staying recovered and thinking, what's that going to look like, particularly when I was thinking about going back to hobbies and thinking about these kind of things, because there are
yeah,
challenging times, life throws things at you.
yeah,
I feel there was moments where I had fear and uncertainty of, well, I really I don't want to ever risk going backwards. And I
yeah,
suppose, even now, if I could speak to that me who was right on the cusp of being fully recovered and had that very understandable concern of how do I make sure that this never gets affected? How do I make sure I stay here?
Yeah.
Actually, I think it feels incredibly natural to do that. You know, it feels very, very natural to look after myself. And I
Yeah.
just know that personally, at the very top of the pedestal of looking after myself, or the bottom of the pedestal, I don't know how to, the top of the most, one of the most
Most
important things, wherever
important.
you put that, whether it's the foundations that support it or they're on the top, one of
Yeah.
the most important things is that I am nourishing and resting. And those are it is it's a really wonderful thing for that respect and that trust to be just so intuitive and it not to be this thing that I have to consciously kind of tussle with. It's just a conscious
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. And I think that this can be true for people who've had eating disorders, for not had eating disorders, where
Mm,
you can really build up this real awareness of your own body and what is required as part of that. And I often talk about that different people have different things that are more or less important to them, and that there's often I don't know, a handful of things that equate for pretty much all of the health that one sees or how someone feels. And by going through recovery and all of the things that you did in terms of food and doing exercise, not doing exercise, all of these things, you start to have this real awareness of what does and doesn't work for you.
yeah,
And so like, oh, those meals tend to help me have a fairly good amount of energy for a long
yeah,
time. Or actually, I really do need to prioritize getting to bed earlier because that's just the way that I am. I had
yeah,
over the weekend, last weekend was a big golf tournament called the Masters. It's in the US. It meant that for 4 nights in a row, I got to bed like midnight. And I'm someone who's normally getting to bed 9, 10 o'clock. And I noticed just how
yeah,
much that had an impact on me. Like on Sunday during the day, I had a 2 hour nap so I could then stay up and do this thing. And there was the recognition of like, I don't want to live like this.
no,
Like this was fun and I'm glad that I did this and this is something I'm passionate about. But my gosh, I can notice how much this had an impact on my system just doing this for 4 days.
yes,
And so cool, I'm going to now this week have really prioritized getting to bed earlier and making up for that sleep debt that is accrued and just being able to become really aware of okay, what are the things that I do need to prioritize and protect in my life.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I suppose, you know, it's the simplicity of that and the lack of having to micromanage or force it, you know, in the same
Yeah.
way that I don't know, I often link the process, that journey back to freedom with food and freedom with nourishment in the
Yeah.
same way that if you were to go to the toilet, you know, you don't have to be thinking. There's no great debate. You're just like, I need to go to the loo. And you do it and you're
Yeah.
finished and it's simple, you know, and you get up and you move on. And actually, I feel like there is that day-to-day simplicity. And then there is also this really deepening. And I imagine this is something that, you know, has continued to deepen over the last years of being fully recovered, especially as I've then navigated really difficult times. Just this real deep and easy solidity of this is what looking after myself is for me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And there are going to be times where that's easier and I have more bandwidth, and there's going to be times where that becomes more challenging because of the busyness of life or going through something with the family or grief or whatever it may be. And for me, I come back to understanding what are the 3 to 5 things that truly matter for you. And so,
Yeah.
like when it is, I have barely any time. Well, if that is the case, I'm still doing my 3 meals, my 3 snacks. I'm still getting to bed at this time as much as I can. I'm still getting outside time or whatever those handful of things are. Like
Yeah.
that's where my priorities are, and the other stuff can fall by the wayside, and I'll pick it back up when there is more bandwidth.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk more generally. I know we've talked a lot about your recovery journey, but I would like to talk about some other topics, and we can talk about this more generally with working with clients. And let's start with extreme hunger. We've obviously talked about your experience with this. So when you're working with people or when you're hearing other people's stories connected to I had extreme hunger, what do you feel like people most likely get wrong with this in terms of what they do or how they respond with this?
Yeah. So I think, and I think it's very, very natural, but I think the main main mistakes that people make is trying to sidestep it in
Okay.
various different ways.
Yep.
And that can be trying to ignore it for periods of time and allowing kind of pockets of permission around the
Yep.
honoring of that. It can also look like filling up on certain foods, permitting, greater abundance with certain safer items, but actually not having the biscuits or the pizza that your body's actually wanting in abundance. So I
Yeah.
think sidestepping and tiptoeing around is probably one of the big errors. I think the
Yep.
other one is compensation around it. So
Yep.
that sort of tendency to be honoring it, but then either swiftly or somewhere around it,
Yep.
engaging in some kind of compensatory behavior. And that could look like kind of having a day of real unconditional permission and honoring of it, and then actually having, a next period of time where that is not happening. It can
Yeah.
also look like compensation in the form of movement. So it may be that there is real bold honoring of that hunger going on, but there is also engagement in some level of movement, which is providing some kind of compensatory mechanism.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I'd love to explain how I work with that, and I'd love to get your thoughts connected to this. Just because over the years from doing this for a long time, I've come to realize there is a lot more nuance with eating disorder recovery than
Yeah.
sometimes is presented online. It can be this very black and white. Well, if you're not eating every moment that you're ever thinking about food, you're restricting, you're not doing full recovery. And I think there can be nuance in the way that people do this. And especially for me, I'll often use structure with people. And hey, we're going to run this experiment with this and see what you notice. So, hey, there is a greater amount of hunger that is coming up. Okay, let's increase your baseline with this and see what
Hmm.
happens. And
Hmm.
being able to have a conversation with someone of,
Hmm.
okay, what do you feel would be the best way to deal with this? And I know you can be then asking for the eating disorders input, but it's always okay. If we're thinking about this from the healthy self perspective, what do you think would be most useful? Because I think what can often happen is there can be this idea of like I've got to fully embrace this and let myself eat if every moment I think about it. And someone does that for a week, completely freaks out, and then they're like, I'm never doing recovery again. And
Hmm.
so it's looking at, okay, what's the best way that we can start to get in the energy that we need while also thinking about we need to do this long enough for you to properly recover.
Yeah.
And so figuring out, okay, what is the right route for this? And if someone's like, hey, I want to completely rip the band-aid off and go headfirst into it, I'm like, great, let's do
Hmm.
that. And if someone else is like, okay, how do I increase things more gradually while I'm honoring my hunger and I'm still keeping some structure, I'm also open to doing that with the we're running this experiment and we'll see what happens over the next 2 weeks and then let's reflect like what did you notice when you did it in this way. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, certainly. And I think I very much agree with that, the challenging of that very black and white view. I
Yeah.
know that all in is a term that's been sort of coined and is used a lot in this space. And
Yeah.
I think there is a lot to be said for that very bold attitude. There's
Sure.
no doubt about it. I do sometimes think, though, that that very black and white, I'm either not doing it or I'm doing it completely, can
Yes.
in and of itself become a barrier to progress. And
Totally.
I think we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. Actually, I think for the vast majority of people who have recovered, if they were to look back on their journey, it wouldn't be a switch of 0 to 100. Actually,
Yeah.
often there is a somewhat stepped approach that occurs to
Yeah.
get to that place. And I know for me, that looked like those couple of weeks where there was some bolder action going on
Yeah.
that then opened the doors. One, opened the doors to my body actually being able to trust to talk to me and go, hey,
Yeah.
I need what's more, please. I'm really hungry.
Yeah.
But also, laid the way to me building up some momentum in that action.
Yes.
That said, I do think that one of the mistakes that people can make is being overly tentative. I think
Yep.
ultimately recovery action is going to make you uncomfortable. There is absolutely no way to do recovery that is not uncomfortable. And I think sometimes people, and it's really natural, are wanting to find the path that isn't uncomfortable or is as minimally uncomfortable as possible.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is often that leads to you feeling very, very stuck
Yeah.
because you aren't doing the work. You're kind of trying to find a tunnel, a bridge, or something. And the reality of recovery is you have got to go through. You've got to go down, you've got to wade through the water, and you've got to scramble up the other side. There's no bridge, there's no tunnel, there's no bypass. You have
Yeah.
to do that. So I think this is where I often speak about that kind of hop, skip, and a jump. When
Yeah.
it comes specifically to this in terms of extreme hunger, I think it is very, very important that people receive the loud message that it is okay to be really hungry and that
Yeah.
it is very
Totally.
normal and natural when you are in an energy deprived state and you have been restricting your body to be really hungry. And that ultimately your hunger is not the enemy. Your hunger is the friend there. Your body is on your side. Your body's not got malicious intent. It's not doing it for a laugh or a joke. Your body is on your side. Your hunger is on your side.
Yeah.
And so I think the combination of that message and an awareness that it needs to be uncomfortable, when you pair that together, for
Yeah.
some people, sometimes through their own experience, they'll realize, I need to be really bold. And that is going to look like you said, ripping the band-aid off. That's going to look like XYZ. For
Yeah.
others, it can be, right, actually, my skip is going to look like these really bold meals that I am going to be making happening. No ifs, no buts, no maybes.
Yeah.
And that can then be something which is built on. I do feel that in order to get, and certainly when I look at my own experience and the paths I have crossed and the work that I get to do in this space,
Yeah.
that to fully recover, I do believe that you have to be honoring your hunger completely.
For
At
sure.
some point in that journey, that skip,
Yeah.
that hop, that jump, there is a need to be really boldly honoring your hunger. But I think absolutely there is a place for that stepped, a bold, progressive stepped that embraces discomfort and challenge because it has to, that
Yeah.
is then seen as a minimum. And I
Yeah.
talk about with clients a lot about that. Whenever we set these things, it is always a minimum.
Yeah.
More is better,
Yeah.
but it is always that minimum. And yeah, I think that's a very important component to be discussed in this space.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with everything you said. And just to sort of clarify my position, when I'm doing this with someone, we're always working to get to this minimum place of that you're having 3 meals, 3 snacks, you're at that 3,500 calories as a minimum.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of working out, okay, where do we go
Yeah.
from here?
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's not that I'm leaving someone in this really small place and I'm like,
No.
hey, we can just add in a tiny piece. Like I am encouraging real
Yeah.
meaningful changes and
Yes.
getting to that pretty solid starting point as a
Yeah.
as a baseline, and then we can
Yeah.
figure out where to go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose, the positive work that you do and the success that you have working with people, that very attitude that forms the foundation of that, doesn't it? Because I think, as I say, there is such a need to accept that it has to be uncomfortable, it has to be
Yes.
challenging. And
Yeah.
that food ultimately, no, recovery is not only about food. There are other aspects to it, absolutely,
Yeah.
but it is the foundations, and I
Yes.
think even when we think about neural rewiring, very, very often, I think there can be almost this kind of jump to go, right, how do I rewire? And ultimately, you can be doing opposite actions and that can be great. But if underneath that, there is not the nutritional rehabilitation going on, it's going to be very, very difficult for your brain to be restoring and healing
Yeah.
in order to be able to most effectively neurally rewire.
Yeah, for sure. And look, this is the thing when I think about recovery, and especially with a lot of the clients I work with now, where this has been going on 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it's had such an impact on so many aspects of their life. Actually, so much of the recovery is not the nutritional rehabilitation piece.
Mm,
It's not the neuro rewiring connected to food and exercise. Like that is the foundation piece that we
mhm,
need to do, and it's then starting to explore so much of the other stuff and
mhm.
the impact that this has had on them over the last handful of decades, and the beliefs and how that has impacted their relationships or things with their
Yeah,
kids or the job that they're now doing and their sense of identity or purpose or the grieving piece. Like that's often the longer part, and in some ways it then merges into this is what I think is the case for most adults, like
Mm.
especially for myself, I'm now in my mid 40s, like I'm doing a lot of work connected to my childhood or how I want to be as a parent or how I was parented or experiences that I went through as a kid and how that then affects me uh, to interact as a parent or the relationships that I have. And so I think for all of us, there can be a lot of ongoing work and not in terms
Yes.
of like I've turned my life into a project, but
No.
just recognizing like, oh, like I would actually like to have a better quality relationship in this area, or I would
Yeah,
like to have less uncertainty or fear in that area. And that's something I think I can work on by starting to learn these tools or practices or
definitely.
whatever. And
Yeah.
so I think as recovery then goes on, when you're doing more of that work, it kind of merges from, because this recovery, or is this just what a lot of people are doing in
Yes.
their 30s and 40s
Yeah.
and 50s?
Definitely, definitely. And I think, that this is one of the things that I think sometimes some treatment approaches get wrong is they sort of flip that over, and there is
Yes.
maybe a bit too much focus on that stuff initially when
Yep.
someone is in undernourished state, when someone has got a very strong neural network for disorder and compulsive behavior. And at that point, really, it, there is a need to be focusing on getting
Yep.
fully nutritionally rehabilitated,
Yep.
rewiring those behaviors, moving out of that stressed state
Yep.
physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, in order to then absolutely, like you just said, create that really solid foundation, that solid nourished state at
Yep.
which that person as a human, because we are all people at the end of the day, we're going through recovery, but ultimately we're all living lives at the same time. Stuff is happening. But
Yep.
it's those things which I think really provide the foundations to then do sort of
Yep.
really, really effective work in any area. And for some people, there isn't anything, and at the end of
Yep.
the day, we are all different. Some
Yep.
people there is minimal, some people there is a lot of stuff that actually at that point is really important to be working through and exploring. But I think, yeah, I think it's very important that we acknowledge the role and the need for that, but
Yep.
do not underestimate the importance of that foundation of
Yep.
nutritional rehabilitation.
Yep.
Nutritional rehabilitation. The amount of times I say that, and I still can get twisted on my tongue so many times. Nutritional rehabilitation and neural rewiring.
Yes, yes, for sure. And look, I don't think it's an either or. I think there can be times and that I will work on some of those things early on with
Yeah,
people because it's then in service of action taking. And this is the thing I always
yeah,
say, like if this just turns into navel gazing and a lot of us reflecting on your childhood and like it doesn't lead anywhere, like that's
yeah,
unhelpful. But if we can recognize that hey, we've talked about the emotions that weren't allowed to be shown when you were a child and how
yeah,
your parents were around these kinds of things. And that allows you to, oh, this is why I need to start to bring in more self-compassion, or this is why I
yes,
need to be kinder to myself in this situation.
yeah,
Like that can be helpful.
yes.
And so it's looking at, okay, this has got to be in service of what is actually required in this moment.
Yes, definitely. It's so, and this is one of the reasons why I am progressively shifting over to longer form content, is because recovery is so nuanced. Yes,
Yeah.
there are trends and themes, as
Yeah.
we were just speaking there, in terms of that process from nutritional rehabilitation, you're into this work. But absolutely,
Yeah.
everyone is unique. Everyone's journey is unique. And it
Yeah.
is really important when we're making and sharing in this space that we are respectful and open about nuance. And I know I often say when I'm creating, you take what helps and leave the rest, because
Yeah.
there are always going to be aspects of things that resonate for some and bits that don't for others. So yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's, I feel like it's important to be having these conversations. This feels good to be bringing that really nuanced lens here.
For sure, for sure. Because look, I know both you and I talk a lot about the biological parts of the
Hmm.
eating disorder and the energy debt parts of
Yeah.
eating disorder, and that we do that for a reason. And the longer I've done this, the more I'm seeing that people have trauma histories. There's a lot
Yes.
of neurodivergence, and that's having an impact on how they experience the world and how intense recovery can be, and even after recovery, how hard things can
Yes.
be, etc. And recognizing, okay, we that needs to be then part of the treatment. It needs to be the things that we're then working on with people, or if I'm not working on it with them, that they're getting the support around that. And yeah, getting out of the very black and white. Like you just
Yeah.
need to eat the food and you rest, and then everything's going to be
Yeah.
gold.
Yeah.
It's just it's not that simple.
No. No.
Yeah. Um, And so let's talk then about mental hunger, because I think this then comes up a lot and is something that both you and I have talked about. But yeah, how do you explain mental hunger to someone? What's the difference between mental hunger or physical hunger? Do you think there's a difference? Like, yeah, talk a little about this.
Yes. Well, I think in terms of the practical element of this, the very important message here that I'm always very keen to get across is that mental hunger is a deeply valid form of hunger. And that actually, in an energy deprived state, our mental cues for hunger
Yeah,
can be more reliable of an indicator of our body's need than our physical cues, and
yeah,
again, if we were to bring all of the nuance here, we could be talking about this one question for hours. So yes, there is but generally speaking, I know this was my experience and I know a lot of people resonate with this, that even where physical hunger may ebb and flow and there may be inconsistencies there, many people find that that mental cueing of food and that mental focus on food and food related things and things which provide permission to eat, which is where, mental hunger is not just thinking about a burger. It could be thinking about that recovery thing, which provides permission to eat that burger. It could be whatever the various forms of
yeah,
it are, but recognizing that it is a really important and wholly valid form of hunger.
yeah, yes, for sure. And I think there can be this misconception where, hey, I've just eaten, so like this is emotional eating, or this is greed, or there can be all these other reasons why this it can't possibly be that I'm still hungry here. And I think this is especially a case where someone's getting into that uh, extreme hunger phase, and it's not only this, but the extreme hunger phase where you knock up against the physically I am so full, and at the
Mm.
same time I'm also so much thinking about food, and there's still
Yeah.
this drive towards it, and like there's this, in some senses it feels like there's this mismatch between what my
Yeah.
body is trying to tell me and what my mind is trying to tell me.
Yes. Yeah. And that is a really, really hard place to be. I remember how challenging that was to be in, where
Yeah,
absolutely, as you have just described, physically, I was feeling full,
yeah,
but actually on a deep level, I wasn't satisfied. My brain
yeah,
was still in the cupboard with the biscuits. I was still thinking, oh, what more of that? And it is a really challenging place to be. And again, I think this is where it's so important to bring that messiness back,
yeah,
because the reality of recovery is that actually honoring that and being bold, it does not always look like happy fluffy bunnies and butterflies and rainbows. Actually sometimes it looks like lying on the sofa eating the biscuits and then getting to a point where you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so so full right now, I just need to lie down with
yeah,
something warm on my tummy and just wait half an hour, because even though I acknowledge, my brain is still going biscuits, 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 I can't fit another M&M in right now, so I'm just going to lie here, I'm going to wait, and let's let the 15 minutes, the half an hour. And my own experience was very much that often that half an hour had passed and think, okay, I can. And one thing that really supported me in this was the bolder I was with honoring and the more consistent I was with that honoring,
yeah,
the greater sort of examples of time I had where actually I felt satisfied. And
yes,
initially, sometimes it wasn't even that I felt hungry, it's that I didn't feel full. It was
yeah,
like the hunger, there was just this vague thing in front of me, but I was just very aware, well, I'm not full. It just feels like I'm kind of throwing food over my shoulder. I'm not quite sure where it's going. It's going in my mouth. I'm eating
yeah,
it, but it feels like I'm just chucking it over my shoulder because I just don't feel any different. And
yeah,
I feel like it was the more I was bold and really proactive with the honoring, the more I reached those places of I am satisfied. And at times they were so fleeting. It might have been a few
yeah,
minutes before I was thinking, oh, cake, that'd be nice right now. But
yeah,
ultimately, those times where I was able to go, oh, I'm satisfied, or those times where I was able to go, oh, I've just been watching this film and I've not thought about the biscuits on the side for 15 minutes.
yeah,
Those were the times where I was able to be beginning to build and rebuild that trust of, yes, this hunger feels so scary and so intense. And
yeah,
there are these times where it's so uncomfortable and it feels so messy and it feels so, for want of a better word, unhealthy. It feels so unnormal.
yeah,
But ultimately, those were the times where I was like, yeah, but my body is telling me, at the end of the day,
yeah,
my body is saying this is what I need. And I'm getting these glimmers of evidence that if I lean in and I'm bold, actually it
yeah,
says, hey, we're good. And the more I did that, obviously that supports that nutritional rehabilitation, which supports getting out of that energy deprived state. But it
Yeah.
also rebuilds and rebolsters that sense of trust in your body of like, no, actually, I can trust that my body wants what it needs and needs what it wants.
Yeah, for sure. And I imagine that the trajectory with this for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you can talk about this with your clients as well. But what I've noticed is there can be this feeling in the beginning of like, oh, how do I give myself that permission, or how do I have that acceptance? And my response is always like, acceptance is a verb, or permission is a
Hmm.
verb. And in the
Yeah.
beginning, it's just the doing, even
Yes.
if there is still some of that mental restriction going on where, okay, I'm eating the thing, but I'm not fully giving myself permission to do it. Like that's at least stage one.
Yeah.
And then as you continue to do it more and more, especially as you recognize, okay, that the sky hasn't fallen in, or I have been able to survive this experience, there then becomes a little more of the mental or the authentic permission where it feels like I'm doing this thing and I'm also choosing this thing. It's not more like, oh, I'll do it, but I just don't know if I should be doing it type thing.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And I think this is where you gather that clarity and that wisdom as you go,
Yeah.
and and also I feel that sort of that sense of, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I know this is the right thing that I'm doing. I know that I'm on the right path. It only comes by taking the action. You cannot think your way there. You
Yeah.
cannot read and watch and listen to things and get to that place. The only way that you get there is by doing it. And with that consistency, it does happen, and the same goes as well in the same concept, but in a different way is actually often you can only know the next steps you take by taking those initial steps. And then actually, as you go, you get more
Yeah.
clarity on, oh, okay, well, no, here it is. And that can be, and this is a totally different topic, but I think that's an interesting one where as you take action in recovery and as you boldly commit to doing things, you gain a new perspective on the areas where and that can feel kind of overwhelming at times because you think, oh my goodness, but I'm doing these things and I've done that, but now I'm aware of all this other stuff, and it can feel like, oh, it just keeps, there's just more moles keep popping up, that kind of game of whack-a-mole. It just feels like
Yeah.
they keep, the more I do, the more they're popping up. And it's kind of knowing that, you learn as you go. And
Yeah.
actually, when you gain clarity over things, whether that is clarity of trust of your body or whether that's
Yeah.
clarity of other places where restriction is showing up, it can
Yeah.
feel frustrating. But ultimately, with that awareness, you can do something about it. Awareness is power because it
Yeah.
supports you then to be able to take action with it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so another topic that I want to go through is neural rewiring. Another thing I say a lot that's also not the easiest to say. So for anyone who doesn't know this term, do you want to explain what it means or what it is, and then what that looks like from a behavioral standpoint? If we're trying to do neural rewiring, what does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of sort of boiling it down, our brains have this thing called neural plasticity, and it basically means that they have this ability to shift and change in response to things that we're learning. So our brain is made up of all of these connections between neurons, and over our life, the things that we do, where we put our attention, experiences we have, sort of determine and drive the connection between those neurons. And this creates these pathways that we speak about. So when
Yeah.
it comes to neural rewiring, what we're talking about is changing the pattern and the pathways of those neural connections in our brain. And if we bounce back to that word neural plasticity, one of the most incredible things about our brain is it retains this ability to be plastic, to change and shift and grow throughout our entire lives. At one point when it comes to neuroscience, there was this idea that really that was something that was mainly in our younger years, and that as you got older, that didn't happen. But actually, there is evidence to show in the neuroscience field that that is lasts the lifetime. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really powerful thing to remember if you are somebody who's been in this for a considerable period of time, or if there is many years of habitual behavior, and there can be
Yeah.
that thought of, but is it possible? I've been doing this for X amount of time. Can I still? And it's so important to remember, yes, the brain retains the ability to be plastic for its whole time, for its whole life, for your
Yeah.
lifetime. And the process action wise, when it comes to shifting those neural connections is about being proactive with your patterns of thinking
Yeah.
and doing. Now, action is kind of top here, it's king.
Yep.
The things that we do have a very powerful impact on the neural networks that we build. We are a species that drives to create habits, and habits have and will be survival mechanisms for so many reasons. And so we very naturally have a brain that wants to create habits. So when
Yep.
we walk a path, engage in a behavior, whether that's action, whether that's thought, a lot, we build and we establish that habitual pattern of thinking and doing. The
Yep.
wonderful thing, though, because of that neuroplasticity, is we have the ability to change that. And as I
Yep.
say, action and what we do is a powerful way that we can shift things, but so too is our thinking. In the same way that if you had a friend or a loved one, and I often like to come back to this because I think sometimes when it comes to neural rewiring, the action is one that it resonates. It's a bit clearer. You're like, okay, now I understand that. And I know for myself, I was like, I get that. If I do this thing and I do it again and again and again and again, I understand that that's going to mean that I learn that new thing. And if I
Yep.
don't do that thing, because that feels very it feels very representative of life and learning new skills. At the end of the day, if you pick up an instrument, if you play it every day, then by the
Yep.
end of a month, you're going to be able to play that better than you did at the start of the month. That is neural rewiring, that's learning in the brain, that's plasticity. But thinking, I think, is another place. And whilst action is king, thinking and our thought is a very important queen here.
Yep.
And actually, where we shine our spotlight of attention, where we think energy
Yep.
flows. And if you imagine it as if you had a loved one or a friend, if you every single day, multiple times, told them a certain thing, and if we link it into body image or something around there, if you repeatedly were saying unkind things to that person, and you did that every single day, there would be a pattern associated with that thought that begins to establish. One,
Yep.
in you as the one who's delivering that information, but also very importantly from the person who is hearing that. And
Yep.
your brain is watching and listening all the time. It pays attention to everything you're doing, it pays attention to everything that you are paying attention to. And so, actually, we have this incredible ability to shift our neural networks and change our neural wiring by addressing our patterns of behavior and by addressing where we put our spotlight of attention. You can't change instantly the thoughts that surface, but you
Yep.
absolutely can shift the spotlight of your attention and where you are directing your response to the thoughts that surface.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally agree with you on that. And especially that last piece where like I'm regularly saying you don't think your way into acting differently, you act your way into thinking differently. And I
Yes.
do believe that the behavior piece is really important.
Yes.
And just noticing like, hey, you can have a thought that you then spend the next 2 hours ruminating on, or you can have a thought and because of different tools that you practice in recovery, you can let that go. And it may come back 5 minutes later and then you let that go. And you start to develop a different relationship with that thought and recognize that, oh, that can be there, but it's actually not impacting on my behavior, or it's not impacting upon where I then go with the next thought and the next thought. And that, again, the more you then do that, the more that that starts to shift, and the more that either that thought doesn't come up, or when it comes up it doesn't have the power over you
Yes.
that it did before. And so yes, it's not just the action taking, although as you say, that is king. It is can be looking at, okay, how do I what do I do when certain thoughts come up? How do I react? And this is all a practice. It's not
Yes.
that, oh, someone tells you about diffusion or different techniques for dealing with thoughts and like, oh, I just got it like day one. It's like
Yeah.
I did this over the weeks and the months and the years, and actually by doing that I've noticed that I'm so much better with my attention.
Yeah, yeah, it's a practice, and certainly when we think about rewiring habitual self conversation or sort of
Yeah.
inner dialogue, I
Yeah.
know this is something I work now also as a climbing instructor. And actually, it's one of the things that I learned through my recovery journey, which it's a skill that shows up in so many areas of my life, including
Yeah.
that where climbing is a space where it can be easy for people to become have a tendency to develop quite negative self-talk if they can't do something, as I'm
Yeah.
sure shows up in all sorts of sports and hobbies and interests,
Yeah.
and how kind of almost knee-jerk it can become that if
Yeah.
you fall off something, it's, oh, I'm crap, or I'm this, or I can't do this, or oh, this. And actually, even the process of just taking a moment to go, that's not very nice to yourself, to say to
Yeah.
yourself, that's kind of mean, and just
Yeah.
having that moment to step back ever so slightly and say, I'm going to commit to noticing when I speak to myself unkindly. And
Yeah.
even the process of that, committing to doing that. And if that's something that's been a habit for a long time, it is going to take time and it's going to feel really clunky and awkward at first.
Yeah.
But even doing that for a number of weeks, you can start to notice where, one, you're just more aware of that tendency. And as we said earlier, with awareness
Yeah.
comes space to then consider doing things differently.
Yeah, for sure. And I also, as you talked about, really want to reiterate how this can actually change and that this isn't permanent. And it was a number of years ago, I did a podcast looking at how restriction impacts the brain and looking at different research around it. And unfortunately, a lot of the research within the eating disorder space around this can say, well, these things are permanent, and once it's happened, it can't change. And when I then dove into looking at what people who were in the study meant to be recovered, I'm like, okay, you're not. This is not people who are actually recovered. And so it's comparing the supposed control group who is still living with an eating disorder and the supposed recovered group who is recovered, and saying, oh, look, their brains are fairly similar. It was that, no, these people that you're saying are recovered aren't actually
Yeah.
recovered. And then when we look at other studies where actually it has done a good job and it is demonstrating people who truly have recovered, there
Yeah.
is a difference in this. And I'm mentioning this because I think there can be this message out there, especially if someone dives into the research and doesn't do a very good job of that, that they can walk away with the idea of like, I've done this permanently. These things are never going to get,
Yeah.
they're never going to get better. And that's just not true at all.
Yes, yeah, there is definitely a need for a continued building on the evidence base
Yeah.
of full recovery. Again, it links back to we need that because that is hopefully, and I'd love to think it's in my own lifetime, but who knows, but hopefully going to start shifting that map, as I spoke about at the start, that is just, yeah, it fails people, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I know I'm about to ask you a question that is very ambiguous in terms of, well, it depends. But if someone was saying, well, look, I'm going to start taking these behaviors, how long do you think it's going to be until it starts to feel automatic or starts to feel easier? Is there a ballpark that you say to someone of like, if you do this X number of times or for X amount of time, this is what I typically see?
Yeah, it is a tricky one, and ambiguity is an important thing to be aware of in this.
Yeah.
I went to a conference a number of years ago around in a neuroscience, and there was somebody there speaking about the idea of 30 days to be shifting and change and to notice, and then 60 days to certainly be noticing kind of on a neural level significant change.
Yeah.
I think, on a more practical level in terms of a combination of my experience, but then very much more so all of the different people that I have had the pleasure of walking alongside them on their journeys. It's often less time than you think.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be a weird answer because I'm going to say two things that seem completely polar opposite. It takes time. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about it. It doesn't, it's not something that, you do it for a couple of weeks and then bing, bang, bosh, all sorted. It takes time. It takes consistency of time. And that
Yeah.
repetition is so important. If you do this, if you do something once a week for 2 years, you could get to the end of that 2 years and feel pretty much the same as you did at the start. Versus if you were to do it every other day for 4, 6 months, you could feel like a totally different person in relation to that thing.
Yeah.
So consistency and repetition is very important. It does take time, but not as long as I think often we imagine it's going to. Actually, I think
Yeah.
when there is a real bold commitment to change and there is the intensity and consistency from the get-go that is needed,
Yeah.
I think often people can find that even within a week. Now, am I saying that people within a week, that's it, everything? No, I'm not. And I want to be really clear about that. But absolutely, as I say, my own experience, I was surprised with some things where
Yeah.
I thought these behaviors were so wired in, it was just going to be excruciating. And it may well have been excruciating that first time and still excruciating the second. But it was amazing to me time and time again in my own journey where maybe the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth time, I was like, oh my goodness. And as I say, maybe a week or 2 weeks in, I was thinking, gosh, that used to be like my go-to. It was my knee jerk. That was that thing that I always had. And the idea of not making it like that or whatever the behavior might have been
Yeah.
felt just so out there. And now I'm just doing it. And so I think, as I said, it's a very polarized response. But
Yes.
one, it takes time and
Yes.
consistency, repetition is crucial in that to support your brain in most effectively and efficiently rewiring. But
Yes.
I really encourage some hope to be created around the idea that actually often it doesn't take as long as you think it might. Certainly in terms of that really excruciating kind of stage.
Yes. And I would agree with that totally. And especially as we get more and more specific. So if it's, I've got a fear around, or one of my fear foods, and you can have a long list, but like, let's say that it's a Snickers or a
Mm,
Mars bar or something along those lines. If it's okay, cool, that is it. And I'm going to commit to having one of these every day or two of these every day or whatever it is. And I'm going to, in a very short amount of time, do this very repeatedly. That is where people get over things pretty quickly. And it is by the fifth, the seventh, the 10th time where actually this feels pretty normal. And
yes.
that then becomes harder because we now have a very, very long list of things that we need to do this for, and it takes time. But again, there can be this sort of knock-on effect with that.
Yeah, the
So
ripple.
I did the
Yes,
Snickers, and then I did the Magnum, and then I did the this. And actually
definitely.
now I've come to this fifth thing or seventh thing. There's not the same degree of worry
Yeah,
connected to it. And it
definitely.
actually gets easier quicker because I've proven how to do this with all of these other things.
Yes, definitely. There is this ripple, sort of almost domino effect when it
Yes.
comes to neurowiring. And I think, yes, a stepwise approach is important. Again, it has to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
But from my own experience and then through the work I do, I have seen many a time that for that reason, there can be a great value in going to what I call the eye of the storm. So for example, you brought chocolate bars there, actually encouraging that open conversation around, okay, but what is the most, like what is, the most challenging? And
Yeah.
really getting to the eye of the storm and going, okay, how might it be? And again, everyone's journey is unique, and there absolutely can be a place for that stepwise with discomfort. But I've seen time and time again, people find a really powerful thing to go straight to the eye of the storm and go, right, I'm going to go right in there. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do that every single day for this week, for these next 2 weeks.
Yes.
And really experiencing the domino effect,
Yeah.
whereby that list of chocolate bars, by going to the eye of the storm, actually it's like, oh my goodness, lots of these things around this now don't feel as challenging. Yes, they still need to be done and they still need to be repeated, and there needs to be that consistency that once it's in, all of that stands true.
Yeah.
But the value there of going to the eye of the storm and allowing that to create this kind of ripple and domino effect.
Yes, for sure. And I think people misunderstand how anxiety provoking they think that thing is going to be. Like
Mm-hmm.
even when we list these things out, the thing that's like 10 out of 10 most scary versus something that's a 5 out of 10, if we were actually to measure anxiety, heart rate, all of these different things while doing it, yes, there is more of a challenge with that thing, but I don't think it's proportional in the way that people think it is. And I'm like you, the more we can do one of those 10 out of 10s to start with, man, that makes everything underneath it so much easier. And look, not everyone takes me up on that as a suggestion, and it can be more gradual to get there. I just know how much that can just like that has a real big shift in one's beliefs.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to talk I want to talk next about food indecision because I think this comes up a lot for
Yeah.
people, especially in the early stages of recovery,
Mm.
where they get stuck in this loop of what should I eat, especially just before a meal or just before a snack, and so yeah, what would be some of the advice connected to this when they're in this indecision place.
Yes. So I think one of the overarching things here is to notice that trend for this to show up more the more hungry that you get. And I
Yeah,
think this is where, very often the dominant thing that lies behind that indecision is hunger, and then those layers of eating disorder, anxiety,
yeah,
judgment, etc., which then complicates it. And
yeah,
so I think in terms of, again, setting yourself up to win in this is where that consistency of nourishment is so important to best support you to not be getting to a place where actually that hunger has jumped and jumped and jumped to the point where suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, and I want that, and I want that, and I would. I
yeah,
also think in line with that, another of the things is where there is still restriction going on, as in, actually, if you are honest, the issue is that your body is kind of going, I want that, and I want that, and I want that, and I want that. I want all of those things, please. That sounds really good to me. And there is
yeah,
then this kind of tussle of, yeah, but no, but which one? Which one am I going to have? And so I suppose both in kind of a general approach of making sure that there is that consistency of adequate, abundant nourishment to
yeah,
support you to be in your best place going into any situation, but also in that moment, remembering that unconditional permission to be
yeah,
eating without restriction. And that
yeah,
actually, this is where and not or can be a really valuable tool to go, hey, maybe we don't have to stand here and be going, oh, which of these do I want? Do I have that or do I have that? Actually, hey, maybe this is a time to practice and not or.
yeah. And I would add as well the recognition that maybe in this state that I'm in, it's gonna feel like the wrong decision. It's gonna feel just
Yeah.
really uncomfortable because
Yes.
I can recognize, oh, it didn't feel like this yesterday. Like
Hmm.
I've talked to clients about the fact I don't have an eating disorder, but if I get super, super hungry, I can spend 20 minutes walking around a supermarket trying to figure out what am I gonna have for dinner
Yeah.
until the point I recognize, like, just pick something.
Yes.
Pick something, get out of here, eat it. It's not going to be a great dinner because you've left this go too far. And okay, we need to just eat something and then we need to move on. Or if you're at a restaurant and you're in that situation where
Yeah.
you can't pick, it's like, okay, but you shouldn't have got this hungry. Like
Yes.
it is what it is now. Just pick something and pick something that is going to be calorie dense. Know that it's not going to be the most enjoyable meal because of how long you've let this go. And great, we're going to do something better next time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I feel like it's always interesting where you can notice the impact of hunger in a nourished state and how that
Yeah,
shows up. And then obviously extrapolate from that the increased intensity of that very same thing in recovery when your body is in that energy deprived state. And this is a perfect example of that. Absolutely. In
yeah,
a normal nourished state, if the days run away with you, and then you've gone to the fridge and think, oh, there's nothing in. Oh my goodness, right now I need to go to the shops. And you end up in the supermarket. And actually, you kind of just gone at that point. You think, right, I'm going to McDonald's first. And then I'll come back and do a food shop. Because right now I can't do any kind of effective food shop because I'm just
yeah,
hungry. It's that, but intensified when you are in that
totally.
energy deprived state. And so, absolutely, it is about predicting that
Yeah,
nothing's necessarily going to feel exactly right, especially when you add in those layers of judgment and those layers of food perfectionism and that pedestal of perfection, which is a side effect of restriction, where
yeah,
actually it feels like every choice is so important because food has become this scarce, precious resource. So the idea of having a meal that is subpar feels like an emotional assault. It's like, no, I can't possibly. I need to have it exactly right because this is very important. I feel
yeah,
these are the times where predicting that, again, doesn't get rid of it, but it helps when you can go in and go, okay, I know what's going on here. This is that pedestal of perfection. I'm really hungry right now. I need to pick something. I need to start somewhere. I can and not, or I can use these different tools.
yeah,
I also think that this is a time where it is so, so important to make sure that you are setting yourself up to win,
yeah,
and obviously that's not something you do in those moments, but stepped back from it,
yeah,
making sure that you have got options at home or with you when you're out that
yeah,
are nourishing, that are
yeah,
energy dense, that are fundamentally boldly recovery aligned, but that are
Yeah.
also quick and easy. So you don't have to spend ages. Gosh, I remember in recovery, even something that took 20 minutes in the oven, it felt intolerable. I was like, 20 minutes. I have to wait 20 minutes for this thing. At the end of the day, I needed it 3 minutes ago. And that could be at a time where actually it was only half an hour ago that I'd finished a family cake. Goodness knows. At the end of the day, recovery is a time where your body is going, I want food and I want it when I want it, which is now. So please, can we hurry up with that? And it's so important to set yourself up to win. And I often speak with coachees about having go-tos. And
Yeah.
so what that is having one up to a maximum of three, I typically say, because again, otherwise you've then got too many options of go-tos and we're in the same problem. But
Yeah.
one, maybe two things that are always available, whether it's in the house, maybe you've got the same equivalent for when you're out, that
Yeah.
actually they're quick, they are energy dense, they are recovery aligned, and
Yeah.
they can be, even if that is just something which you use as a go-between to the choice of what you're going to have. Because very often when I utilize this in recovery, one of those would be a bowl of granola. And I'd be like, right,
Yeah.
I can't choose. I'm going to get a bowl of granola. And I'd sit down with that bowl of granola. And by the time I was like halfway through it or so, I'd start getting a thought of, oh, lasagna. Lasagna,
Yeah.
that sounds nice right now. So I'd
Yeah.
be like, right, okay, I'm going to stick the oven on. I'm going to come back. I'm going to finish my granola. I'm going to stick something in. And
Yeah.
actually, this is where those go-tos, one, they can serve the purpose in that time to cut through if they are energy dense, if they're nourishing, to actually meet that need in that moment, or they can be catalysts to you
Yes.
being able to kind of cut through the fog and the quagmire of, oh, what do I want? And go, right, no, actually, this is supporting my brain in the here and now to be able to go, ah, that sounds good to me. I'm going to have that.
Yes, for sure. And I would just add as well, when I described it from me as an experience, it's like a
Mm,
one-off. And
yeah.
for someone in the early stages of recovery, this could be their experience every single meal,
Yes.
every single snack because
Yeah.
of the state that
Yeah.
they're in. And
Yeah.
again, you've talked about it a number of times. You haven't used this phrase, but like managing expectations of
Mm,
explaining to clients of like, this is what it is going to be like. This isn't because you've done something wrong or that
yeah.
it's like, this is just what happens in recovery,
Yeah.
given the state that you're in. And so you're going to come to each meal and each snack feeling like this, having these kinds of thoughts come up, having these kinds of sensations in your body. And again, this is why the whole simplifying is so much easier so that you're not having to make some grand decision. It's like, oh, that's on my plan. That's what I
Yeah.
have for my lunch. And that's
Yes.
what I have for my afternoon snack. And I already know, so I'm not trying to decide in that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said earlier about the fact that, it isn't just about eat the food and rest. It's
Yeah.
not as simple as that. But there is no doubt about it. There's lots of ways in which recovery is simple and can be simplified, and that simplifying things can help. And this is one example of that. No, it is not only those two things, but
Yes.
those two things do play an incredibly important role. And wherever possible, especially because fear and anxiety likes to complicate things,
Yeah.
it is valuable to come back down to basics and to have these simple strategies that you can pick up and use, and just to come back and go, right, I'm hungry. I
Yes.
need to do and I need to find the things that support me to be making sure that I'm getting more food in. And same goes for rest. Actually, no, I need bum on seat, and I need to lean into the things that support me to keep bum on seat.
Yes, yes, for sure. And this is, I know that there can be a lot of black and white thinking around meal plans and people again who are like, oh, if you're following a meal plan, you're not really doing recovery, you're not listening to your body. And again, I'm like, let's look at the situation here. The most important thing, especially in the beginning, is we need more energy coming in. If someone having a plan that helps them do that, and that's the way that they get the most amount of energy in, like, hey, that's the best thing that someone should be doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is often a place where you can sort of shine a very bright light on some EDBS, as I quite like to call it, which is that very often there can be, where resistance shows up, it can come in the form of poo-pooing things that are
Yes,
supportive of recovery. And it can
yes,
dress itself up as, oh no, that's not going to rewire your brain. That's not going to do that. That's not, and suddenly you can have this fundamentally eating sort of resistance showing up
yes,
as some kind of recovery ambassador, and you think,
yes,
wait a second, actually, let's step back, let's shine a bright light on this.
yes.
Especially, I know for myself that looked like going, Isn't it interesting that the moment I'm talking about having a backbone of regular, abundant meals and snacks, and hey, sometimes these are going to have to maybe not be that varied because that's just going to be really helpful to me when I'm home alone or when I haven't got loads of time and space to be preparing things, or I don't have the mental bandwidth to be dealing with lots of stages and steps to prepping. Hey,
Yeah.
isn't it funny how suddenly there's lots of resistance to that, but
Yeah.
the regular meals and things that I've been routinely having the same of multiple over, that's somehow that's fine. That's all okay. That's good. But the
Yeah.
idea of actually going, right, here's some regular things as that backbone, there's
Yeah.
resistance here. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's important to shine that bright light and
For
call
sure.
out where EDBS shows up. And to remember
Mm.
ultimately that again, we come back to that thing of meal plans. The meal plan that supports recovery is one which is caveated with that it's a minimum. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, it is there as that backbone, as that,
Yeah.
if the sky falls down, no matter what, that is happening. That's what that
Yeah.
is. And
Yeah.
that is there as that floor to support. There is no ceiling, but we're
Yes.
building and we're progressing that floor so that it is really supportive of recovery.
Yes, fully. Yes, because I hear there's a lot from people like, but I want to have food freedom and I want to like that's what recovery is about. And it's like that's where you get to.
Yeah.
That's not where we start on day one. And if we are looking at what you're actually doing and you've now had that same breakfast now that's inadequate, but you're still doing that and you've been doing that for a very long time, it's not like you're doing the food
Yeah.
freedom option. So
Yeah.
if we're choosing between you doing what you're doing or a very structured approach to get more energy in,
Yeah.
that's the better of those two options because the third option you're actually not doing.
Yeah,
Like if
definitely.
you want to prove to me that you can do the food freedom option and that you can pick in the moment and you're getting in abundance, great. Like
Yeah,
actually have that work. But if that's not actually going on, let's not pretend
no,
that's what's going to
definitely. Definitely. And I think often something that I sort of work with people on this is encouraging, challenging that hypothesis with going, hey,
Yeah.
actually, what can we do that's going to be bringing food freedom on top of this minimum? Because all that is, it's
Yeah.
just a minimum, it's a backbone.
Yeah.
So actually, the best way that you are going to get to that place of spontaneity, of freedom,
Yeah.
is that we can go, well, this is the floor, this is that backbone. How
Yeah.
about we set some commitments where you're going to say yes when anything's offered? And actually, how about we go a bit more in this and we actually plan that you're going to speak to your partner or a friend or whoever it might be, the people in your life that you're in close contact with, and you're going to let them know about this so
Yeah.
that actually there is a higher chance that's going to happen. So, hey, look, we're challenging that. And I often think that this is a point then when people can get honest with themselves and go, oh no, that feels really uncomfortable. And that's where then we
Yeah.
look and we go, okay, well, what's happening here then? Is this the fear that this is not going to lead to full recovery because it's not free enough? Or is this a fear in terms of eating disorders resistance
Yeah.
to change in whatever form it may come in?
Yes, totally, totally agree. Well, look, Emily, we've been chatting for nearly 2 hours, and I feel like we
Have
can
we?
continue
No.
chatting for a lot longer. But look, where if people have enjoyed this conversation, if they want to find out more about you, where do you want to point them to go to?
Well, I think my YouTube channel, Emily Spence, I can share with you some details of
Yeah,
that so that there's things. So my main places that I'm still sharing is my YouTube channel. I run a podcast with another colleague called Unrestricted,
yeah,
and then also my Instagram. I'm not as active on Instagram anymore, but every now and again I post bits and pieces. So yeah, those are probably the main places that people can find me, and I'll share the details so you can hand them on to people.
okay, perfect. Well, I'll put that in the show notes, and yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad we got to finally do this. It was an easy conversation from my end, but a really informative, practical one.
Yeah, no, it's been, I can't believe that the time has flown by. I think it's been brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
So that was my conversation with Emily Spence. I really loved it. I highly recommend that you check out her YouTube channel and her podcast if you've liked this, because I think she's doing incredible work on those platforms. And as you heard in this conversation, we are very much aligned in our approaches around eating disorder recovery and how we think about recovery. As I mentioned at the top, I'm going to be opening up spots to my group program on Monday, the 20th. While Emily wasn't a client of mine, I think this is a great conversation in terms of Emily being this example of what full recovery is and what is possible as part of full recovery. And it doesn't mean that you then need to become a recovery coach, but hearing the details of her life and the things that she's now able to do, that is being born out of the fact that she did recover and that she did fully recover. And even though there were points where to the outside world, she was living in this quasi place and no one really knew that that was going on, and people may have made assumptions on how good her life was or whatever it may be, she could tell that this wasn't the life that she wanted to live. And this is, again, what I work on in terms of my program. There are people who are very much at the beginning stages of recovery, and there are people who, hey, I recognize that I've made strides and I'm not where I was in terms of things being at their worst. And I know that the eating disorder is still having a big impact on my food choices, my movement choices, the kinds of things that I'm doing in my day-to-day. So if you would like help and you want to come into that program, you can send an email to info@7-health.com and just put group in the subject line, or you can send a DM at 7health company on Instagram and I can send over the details. There's only going to be 20 spots available, and if you're interested, get in contact. So that is it for this episode of the podcast. I will be back next week with another new episode. Until then, take care, and I will see you soon.